The war in the skies over Europe was supposed to be quick, decisive, and dominated by the Luftwaffe. In 1940, Germany's air force was the most advanced in the world. Sleek Messerschmitts, lethal Focke-Wulfs, and pilots trained in the crucible of the Spanish Civil War. By the time the United States entered the war in December 1941, the Luftwaffe had carved its legend across the skies of Europe. Its aces had already shot down thousands of Allied aircraft, and the myth of German air superiority seemed unbreakable. But war has a way of shifting with industry, willpower, and time. And in the air above Europe, time was running out for Germany. By 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force had begun its daylight bombing campaign, a bold and controversial strategy. Thousands of heavy bombers, primarily the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, crossed the English Channel to strike the industrial heart of Nazi Germany. They targeted ball-bearing plants, oil refineries, and aircraft factories, the backbone of Hitler's war machine. The mission was to cripple the Reich's ability to fight, but there was one glaring flaw. The bombers flew without long-range fighter escort. American military doctrine had promised that tight formations of heavily armed B-17s could defend themselves. Each bomber carried up to 13 machine guns. In theory, a formation of dozens could create a deadly crossfire, a flying fortress indeed. But theory met reality over the skies of Germany. German pilots quickly realized that the bombers, though brave, were slow, predictable, and vulnerable. The Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings flying the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf Fw-190, waited like hawks near targets in Bremen, Hamburg, and Schweinfurt. When the unescorted formations appeared, they pounced. The results were catastrophic. In the infamous Schweinfurt, Regensburg raid of August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers in a single day, nearly 600 airmen killed or captured. In October, the second Schweinfurt mission, later called Black Thursday, ended even worse. 77 bombers lost, 121 damaged. Out of 291 aircraft that left England that morning, only 33 returned unscathed. The Luftwaffe's laughter was almost audible through the radio chatter. American command began to realize an uncomfortable truth. The daylight offensive could not continue without fighter escort, and none of the existing fighters could reach beyond northern France. The P-47 Thunderbolt, powerful but fuel-hungry, could not go much farther than the Rhine. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning fared better, but was limited in altitude performance and mechanical reliability in cold European conditions. The bombers were alone, and the losses were unsustainable. But then, almost quietly, salvation appeared in the form of an aircraft that few at first understood. It was sleek, elegant, and fast. Its name was the North American P-51 Mustang. Originally designed as a stopgap for Britain, the Mustang began as an underpowered, ordinary fighter equipped with the Allison engine, decent at low altitude, but mediocre above 15,000 feet. Then, in 1942, British engineers made a decision that would change aviation forever. They replaced the Allison with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same engine that powered the legendary Spitfire. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. With the Merlin engine, the P-51 could climb to 40,000 feet, cruise at over 430 miles per hour, and, crucially, fly more than 1,500 miles with external fuel tanks. It was the long-range escort the bombers had been waiting for. By early 1944, the P-51 entered combat over Europe, and the air war began to change overnight. For the Luftwaffe, the shock came slowly at first. German radar stations detected formations of bombers as usual, but now something was different. The escort fighters no longer turned back over the channel. They kept coming and coming. The first full Mustang escort to Berlin on March 4, 1944, stunned German intelligence. For years, they had calculated that American fighters could never protect bombers beyond Western Germany. Now P-51s were strafing airfields outside Berlin itself. The unthinkable had happened. The hunters had become the hunted. In the skies above Leipzig, Brunswick, and Berlin, the Luftwaffe met its new nemesis. The P-51s dove from the sun with devastating precision, tearing through formations of FW-190s and BF-109s before they could even reach the bombers. Veteran German aces who had once boasted of their kill tallies now watched in disbelief as the tables turned. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most respected fighter commanders, would later admit, "We knew then that the war in the air was lost." The numbers were merciless. Between January and June 1944, the Luftwaffe lost nearly 2,000 fighters and thousands of irreplaceable pilots. American air production, by contrast, soared. In the same period, the United States built more than 8,000 new fighters and trained entire squadrons faster than Germany could replace a single ace. The Mustang's secret wasn't just range and speed, it was adaptability. Its laminar flow wing reduced drag and allowed for smoother airflow at high speeds, while its internal fuel efficiency and external tanks gave it unmatched reach. Pilots loved it. As one American flyer said, "She could take you to Berlin and back and still dogfight over the target." From that spring onward, German airfields became graveyards of twisted metal. Allied Mustangs began flying fighter sweeps, aggressive missions to hunt down the Luftwaffe before bombers even arrived. They strafed runways, destroyed parked aircraft, and ambushed takeoffs. By the time bombers appeared, few German fighters remained to intercept them. For the first time in years, the skies over Europe belonged not to the Luftwaffe, but to the Allies. And it showed. By May 1944, Luftwaffe units defending the Reich were fighting at barely half strength. Their pilots were younger, less trained, and increasingly demoralized. The veteran cadre that had once dominated the skies, men like Steinhoff, Roll, and Barkhorn, found themselves overwhelmed by sheer numbers and relentless attrition. Even when new aircraft like the Me-262 jet appeared, it was too late and too few. As the Allies prepared for D-Day, the P-51 ensured that German air power would never threaten the invasion. In June 1944, while tens of thousands of troops stormed Normandy's beaches, P-51s swept the skies clear. The Luftwaffe managed to launch only scattered sorties. Most were shot down within minutes. In total, American and British fighters achieved air supremacy so complete that by late 1944, German pilots described flying as a death sentence. And yet, the story of the Mustang was about more than victory. It was about transformation. It represented the moment when technology, strategy, and industry aligned perfectly. It was the physical embodiment of Allied cooperation, an American airframe, a British engine, flown by pilots from across the free world. It turned despair into dominance and laughter into silence. By the spring of 1945, the once-proud Luftwaffe was shattered. Its airfields were craters, its factories bombed to rubble, its pilots gone. The same skies that had once echoed with German victory songs now hummed with the steady drone of Allied bombers flying unopposed toward Berlin. The P-51 Mustang had done more than escort bombers. It had escorted the Allied cause, from survival to supremacy, from vulnerability to victory. And when the guns finally fell silent and the Luftwaffe ceased to exist as an organized force, the Mustang remained in the sky not as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of what happens when ingenuity meets determination. The Luftwaffe had once laughed at unescorted bombers, but when the Mustangs came, the laughter died in the clouds. The story of the P-51 Mustang was not born in the skies of Europe, but in the minds of engineers who refused to accept limitations. When North American aviation received Britain's desperate request in 1940 for more fighters, they could have simply produced an existing model under license. Instead, the company's chief designer, Edgar Schmude, proposed something radical: a completely new aircraft that could be built faster, fly farther, and handle better than anything before it. Within just 117 days, the first prototype was finished, a testament to the very speed and efficiency that would later define American wartime industry. The plane was sleek, with thin laminar flow wings that reduced drag at high speed. Its cockpit offered a wide, clear canopy, something Luftwaffe pilots would later envy. But when the prototype first flew with the Allison engine, it revealed its flaw. It could not breathe at altitude. Above 15,000 feet, the realm of bomber formations, its power faded. For most aircraft, that would have been the end. Yet innovation does not rest on disappointment. In 1942, British engineers at Rolls-Royce saw what others had missed. They took the new American airframe, removed the Allison, and replaced it with their legendary Merlin 61 engine, the heart of the Spitfire. The transformation was immediate. The new hybrid machine could climb like a rocket, maintain power at 40,000 feet, and fly twice as far as a Spitfire. When tested over England, pilots could hardly believe the performance. One report simply read, "The aircraft is a dream." By the time America's 8th Air Force adopted the new version, the Mustang had become something more than a fighter. It was a promise that no bomber would ever again fly into Germany unprotected. In the winter of 1943, the U.S. strategic bombing campaign stood on the brink of failure. Too many losses, too few results. Commanders like General Yeager faced impossible arithmetic. To destroy the Reich's industry, bombers had to go deep. But to go deep meant sending hundreds of men to near-certain death. Then came General Jimmy Doolittle, famous for his Tokyo raid 2 years earlier. He brought with him a new philosophy. Fighters were no longer to be tethered protectively to bomber formations. Their mission was simple: destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it hid. When the P-51 squadrons arrived in full force in early 1944, Doolittle unleashed them. They swept ahead of the bombers, tore into wading German interceptors, and strafed airfields, rail lines, and fuel depots. The Luftwaffe, once confident, now faced a relentless enemy that hunted them even on the ground. German commanders were stunned. What had once been a measured defense became chaos. Pilots scrambled to take off only to find Mustangs already diving on them. Airfields at Rhein, Oldenburg, and Münster burned under the new Allied onslaught. Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's general of fighters, lamented in his post-war writings, "It was not courage we lacked, it was fuel, numbers, and hope." The statistics tell the story. In 1943, Germany still produced nearly 1,000 combat aircraft per month. By the end of 1944, Allied bombing had cut that output by half, and the loss rate exceeded replacements. Fuel shortages grew so severe that many new aircraft never flew a single combat mission. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American factories operated around the clock. At North American's Inglewood plant in California and its Dallas facility, Mustangs rolled off the line like automobiles. The United States built 15,486 P-51s, each one a piece of precision engineering mass-produced with assembly line efficiency. Behind every aircraft stood a small army of workers, engineers, welders, riveters, and women filling roles once reserved for men. The Mustang was not just a machine of war, it was a monument to industrial democracy. Every rivet and weld represented a nation's collective resolve. As the spring of 1944 unfolded, the balance of power tilted visibly. German ground troops, once shielded by the Luftwaffe, began looking to the skies with dread. P-51s roamed the airspace of occupied Europe at will, strafing convoys, trains, and communication lines. Nothing moved by day without risk. The term, the Mustang Hour, entered German slang, the hour when any movement could bring sudden death from above. Even the famed 88mm flak gunners, veterans of years of defense, began to feel futility. No matter how many shells they fired, the sky filled again with silver shapes that refused to fall. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt. They concentrated their dwindling resources around oil targets, introduced new high-altitude tactics, and even fielded advanced aircraft like the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet. But each innovation arrived too late. The pilots who might have mastered them were gone, lost over Normandy, Belgium, or the Ruhr. For those who survived, morale evaporated. Many Luftwaffe veterans later described a haunting realization. They were no longer defending victory, but merely delaying defeat. One pilot, Heinz Knoke, wrote in his diary, "The enemy dominates the air. We live in the shadow of their wings." In the meantime, American airmen learned to trust the Mustang as they trusted life itself. Bomber crews could now look out from their plexiglass turrets and see sleek P-51s dancing in formation alongside them, silent guardians slicing through the thin blue air. For the young men inside the bombers, that sight meant survival. It meant that perhaps this time they would make it home. The psychological effect was immense. The phrase "little friends" became a term of affection and gratitude used by bomber crews to describe their escorts. Many airmen wrote that the flash of a Mustang's silhouette through flak bursts was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. That bond between bomber and escort forged the success of Operation Argument, better known as Big Week, in February 1944. For 7 days, the Allies unleashed a relentless offensive against German aircraft production. P-51s led the charge, smashing factories at Leipzig, Regensburg, and Gotha. By the end of that week, the Luftwaffe's fighter arm was crippled beyond repair. Over 600 German fighters were destroyed. The airfields that had once launched swarms of interceptors now stood littered with smoking wreckage. From that point on, Germany never regained control of its own airspace. When D-Day came on June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe was largely absent. Out of more than 300,000 Allied troops who landed on Normandy's beaches, not one was attacked by German aircraft on the first day. Allied bombers and fighters flew 14,674 sorties, while the Luftwaffe managed fewer than 300. It was the P-51 that ensured that dominance, patrolling the skies from dawn until dusk, denying the enemy any chance to regroup. As the Allies pushed inland, the Mustangs moved to forward bases in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Each day, their range grew deeper into Germany's collapsing empire. By late 1944, they were striking Berlin, Dresden, and even the edges of Czechoslovakia. When Soviet troops advanced from the east, they saw the same silver aircraft sweeping the horizon, the mechanical wings of a new kind of air power. But for the Luftwaffe's last defenders, the experience was almost apocalyptic. In the final months of the war, Germany's fighter pilots were mostly teenagers. Many had fewer than 20 flight hours when sent into combat. They faced Mustang veterans with hundreds of sorties behind them. The result was predictable and tragic. Entire Luftwaffe squadrons disappeared in single engagements. Training aircraft were thrown into battle as desperate measures. In the sky above Berlin in April 1945, the once formidable German fighter force existed only as scattered remnants. The Mustang's dominance was so overwhelming that by war's end, its pilots achieved an estimated 11-to-1 kill ratio against enemy aircraft. Yet amid this destruction, there was also a sobering truth. Air supremacy came at a terrible cost. More than 26,000 American airmen died in the European theater, a loss rate higher than that of the U.S. Marine Corps in the Pacific. The skies over Germany were victory's most expensive battleground. And still they flew, because every mission meant another step toward ending the war, another chance that fewer soldiers would die on the ground. When the last Luftwaffe resistance finally collapsed, the air above Europe fell silent. The bombers no longer needed escorts. The flak batteries stood empty. Germany's cities lay in ruins, but the skies, once a battlefield, had become symbols of liberation. In May 1945, when the guns ceased, Allied pilots looked down from their cockpits at a defeated Reich and reflected on what had changed. Only 2 years earlier, those same skies had been a place of terror, where waves of German fighters ripped apart unescorted bombers. Now the tables were turned completely. The laughter that once echoed over Black Thursday had been replaced by silence, the silence of a vanished air force. The P-51 Mustang had done more than win a war in the air. It had proven something larger. That courage, when paired with innovation and unity, could overturn even the most formidable enemy. Its legacy did not end in 1945. After the war, the Mustang served in Korea, trained generations of new aviators, and inspired jet-age designs. To this day, its silhouette remains one of the most recognizable in aviation history, the perfect blend of grace and power. In museums, its polished aluminum glints beneath hangar lights. In airshows, its Merlin engine still sings that haunting, mechanical symphony. the same sound German pilots once heard before the sky fell around them. The Mustang was the turning point, not only in the war, but in the very idea of air power. It taught the world that the sky could decide the fate of nations, and for the men who flew it, it would forever remain more than a machine. It was freedom embodied in metal and wings. The Luftwaffe had mocked the unescorted bombers, but when the P-51s came, they did not just escort, they avenged, protected, and conquered. And with their arrival, the war in the air and the war in Europe was decided.